So Newton's law of cooling as applied to the internal flow, not much different from the external flow, except that here you find Tm in place of T infinity, right? So you're talking about the mean temperature as the representative temperature for the internal flow. So Qs double prime, that is the heat transfer rate per unit area, would be heat transfer coefficient into Ts minus Tm, which is the potential for heat transfer. And it was also told that in fully developed conditions, the temperature profile, like it continues to change with x, but the relative shape of the profile no longer changes, and the flow is said to be thermally fully developed. So which equation is satisfied? D by dx of Ts minus T upon Ts minus Tm, right? Which is the non-dimensional temperature ratio. This does not remain function of x or does not change with x. So the derivative with respect to x becomes 0. So this is the criteria for thermally fully developed flow. It's not like the uh, the momentum boundary layer development, where the shape of the velocity profile does not change, right? But here this is the ratio which does not change. Now the temperature ratio is independent of x, so the derivative of this ratio with respect to r must also become independent of x. And Ts and Tm are constants when you are talking about the change with respect to r. So this d by dr of Ts minus T upon Ts minus Tm at r equal to Ro is equal to, so this can be written as minus dt by dr at r equal to Ro upon Ts minus Tm, right? So because this Ts minus T upon Ts minus Tm is not function of uh, 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 or derivative of this is 0, or this is not function of x, its derivative with respect to r is also not function of x, right? This may be understood with the help of uh, this diagram what I've drawn. This is the tube through which the fluid is flowing, and let's say you are taking 2 points, like here A and C, here B and D, right, at some distance dx. So the change, like the differentiation of that temperature ratio, okay, with respect to x is 0. It means it would not change from C to D, right? And it would also not change from A to B. Okay, so the differentiation of that ratio from C to A or from D to B also would be same, right? So that's the logic that has been applied, and you can write this that minus dt by dr at r equal to Ro upon Ts minus Tm. So this Ts minus Tm is also constant when you are talking about the change with respect to r. At a particular cross section, it is a constant. So that is not a function of r, not a function of x. Okay. And then using the Fourier's law, you can apply Fourier's law, because you are talking about r equal to Ro, means you are talking about the first layer at the surface, which is stagnant or having zero velocity. So you write this in the form of dt by dy. You can write it like this: y is equal to 0. Y, you are taking the starting point or y-axis at the surface of the tube, and so y is equal to Ro minus r. So that way, this would be k dt by dr, right, when r equal to Ro. Okay. Now using these equations and Newton's law of cooling, you would be able to show that Qs double prime, okay, what was shown here, right? If you use this 8.27 along with these equations, then you find, or you will be able to show, that h upon k is not a function of x, right? H upon k is not a function of x. So when the fluid properties are constant, k is thermal conductivity of the fluid, so that is also a constant. So that would mean that h is not a function of x when the flow becomes thermally fully developed. So that may be shown graphically like this. Okay. So when the flow becomes thermally fully developed, h is becoming constant, right? So it becomes a single number. You don't even need a correlation. But this is, mind well, this is only for laminar fully developed flow. While the flow is developing, if you're talking about the, let's say, constant heat flux, then the Qs double prime is constant, but your difference, okay, here this is h, but h at the entry length, h will always be high, right? So that goes on increasing, right? And its value is very high at the entry, but then when the flow becomes thermally fully developed, it becomes constant, right? Okay. Now, when you're talking about uniform surface heat flux, h as well as Qs double prime, both are constant. So from Newton's law of cooling, you are able to write this equation 8.30 when your Qs double prime, that is the heat flux, is constant heat flux boundary condition, right? And then from equation 8.28, if you solve it for dt by dx, right, from, if you solve it for dt by dx, then you get the equation like this, 8.31. Okay, and when you substitute 8.30 in that, you are able to write it in this form. So dt by dx for fully developed, thermally fully developed flow is equal to dTm by dx, right? Because this Tm is not a function of R, so you can write total derivative rather than partial derivative. Now this is the case when the heat flux is constant. So what does it mean? The axial temperature gradient, right? This dt by dx is axial temperature gradient, okay, is independent of radial location. Okay, it is independent of radial location because this dTm by dx does not depend upon radius, it depends upon the x value only. Okay, so this is one conclusion that you can derive for thermally fully developed flow when the heat flux is constant. Now when the heat flux is not constant, but let's say surface temperature is constant, so in that case your dt by dx would have this value Ts minus T upon Ts minus Tm into dTm by dx, right? So here the value of dt by dx depends upon the radial coordinate. So there is difference between the constant heat flux boundary condition and constant surface temperature boundary condition in like the nature of the gradient, temperature gradient, okay, along x direction. Okay. Now we are applying energy balance to a small volume, infinitesimal volume in the tube, and with the help of that we get an important equation using which we would be able to show the nature of change of Tm, the mean temperature, when the heat flux is constant and when the surface temperature is constant. Okay. Now for the whole tube, we can write this equation: total heat that is convected into the fluid. This is the mean inlet outlet temperature minus mean inlet temperature into m dot into Cp of the fluid. So that's the total heat transferred into the fluid throughout its length. But if you apply energy balance to a small volume like this, so dq convected into the tube, right, assuming that the surface temperature is higher than the fluid temperature, and in this local area, let's say the heat flux is constant, and that is equal to qs double prime into p into dx. Okay. Now this qs double prime may or may not be constant. If you are talking about constant heat flux, it will be constant. If you are talking about constant surface temperature, it may not be constant. But you are taking a small infinitesimal volume, so the surface area is also accordingly a small value because this dx is small. Okay. So this dq convected, right, what would happen due to that? It will change the mean temperature from Tm to Tm plus dTm, right? So this heat convected into this volume is nothing but it is increasing the temperature by dTm, so that is equal to m dot into Cp into dTm. Okay, so with this, like if you perform this dTm by dx, right, from the previous equation, okay, you can say it is equal to qs double prime into p, right? You had x here, but you have you have done the differentiation, so it is qs double prime p into m dot Cp, right? Or qs double prime is nothing but h into ts minus Tm. So it is P upon m dot Cp into h into Ts minus Tm. So this equation is a very simple equation, but still can be used to get the nature of change of Tm with along the length of the tube. If you apply the constant heat flux surface condition or boundary condition, right? So Q convected is nothing but Qs double prime into P into L for the whole length of the tube. For length dx, it would be dx here, right? So dTm by dx is Qs double prime P into m dot Cp, right? As it was shown here. Now, because this Qs double prime is not a function of x, constant heat flux boundary condition, right? Other things are also constant. P and m dot Cp are constant. So dTm by dx is not a function of x. It means that the Tm, you can integrate it over some length of the tube from, let's say, x equal to 0 to x equal to x. So in that case, the equation for Tm, the mean temperature as a function of x, would be Tmi plus Qs double prime P into x upon m dot Cp, right? So this is nothing but equation of a line. It means that the change of the mean temperature in this case is linear. It changes linearly, right? But this is for the fully developed region. So you can see the graph, right? So this equation is actually applicable throughout the length of the tube, right? So it varies linearly, as you can see, it varies linearly. But what happens, like if you think of the surface temperature, what happens is surface temperature, the heat flux is constant and h is also constant when the flow becomes thermally fully developed. So because of that, the difference between Tm and Ts is constant. It remains the same, or they run as parallel lines. But in the entry region, H value is high, but your Qs double prime is same. So obviously Ts minus Tm has to reduce. So as you can see, the gap between Ts and Tm goes on reducing in the entry region and is least at the entry to the tube, right? So with the help of this equation, you could show how Tm varies along the length of the tube. Basically, it's a linear change which is happening. And regarding Ts, you can see that in the fully developed region, it remains, the difference remains constant, but the difference goes on reducing in the entry region. Now this was for the constant heat flux boundary condition where your Qs double prime is constant, right? Qs double prime is constant. So that's why you could write it like this. What if the surface temperature is constant, right? So surface temperature is constant. So it's a horizontal line here. And how is Tm going to vary? So you can show that the gap, this Ts minus Tm, reduces or this changes change diminishes exponentially, right? The difference diminishes exponentially. That is what you can show. So the temperature difference between Ts and Tm here is shown as delta Ti, the temperature difference at the entry, delta Ti, and the temperature difference at the exit, because the heat exchanger or a tube has a finite length L. So in that length, like at the outlet, the temperature difference is equal to delta TO, right, which is equal to this local value of Tm and Ts, which is remaining constant. Okay, so this you can show with the help of the same very simple looking equation, right? What was given earlier, this dTm by dx is equal to P upon P is perimeter upon m dot Cp into H, and this delta T is nothing but Ts minus Tm. Okay, so this dTm by dx is nothing but it this delta T is, what is this delta T? Delta T is equal to Ts minus Tm, right? So dTm by dx can be written as minus d of delta T upon dx, and that is equal to P upon m dot Cp H delta T. So this delta T is again Ts minus Tm, and then you are separating the variables and integrating it from the entry or inlet to the tube to the outlet of the tube, where whose length is equal to L. So in that case, you can show natural log of delta TO. What is delta TO? Delta TO is the temperature difference Ts minus Ti, right? And Ts minus To, the difference at the outlet, and this is the difference at the inlet. So natural log of that is equal to PL upon minus PL upon m dot Cp, and you take like multiplied this with 1 upon L and multiplied with L, and because you want to show this as a, or write this as a as an average value of H, right? So that is what is written in the next equation. This is 8.41a. Okay, now here your Ts is constant. Okay, so delta TO upon delta Ti is nothing but exponential of minus PL upon m dot Cp into H bar. Okay. And you can integrate it from 0 to say some value x, right? So in that case, it will look like this. So basically what this equation shows is that Ts minus Tm decays exponentially, right? The gap between them is reducing exponentially along the length of the tube. Okay. And then you would be able to show this this Q convection m dot Cp, which is nothing but m dot Cp into Ts minus Tmi. This is the difference at the inlet, and this is the difference at the outlet, right? So Q convection is nothing but m dot Cp into delta Ti minus delta To. Okay, and if you compare or if you replace the value of m dot Cp from the above equation 8.41a, so if you put the value of m dot Cp from here, you get this equation: Q convection is equal to h bar As delta Tm, right? And this delta Tm is actually nothing but delta To minus delta Ti upon natural log of delta To minus delta Ti. And this is called log mean temperature difference. Log mean temperature difference, right? At the entry, the temperature difference was delta Ti. At the exit, the temperature difference is delta To. But what is the average temperature difference, right? Because the change is exponential, or the difference diminishes exponentially, the average delta T is not arithmetic average. So it should be taken as the log mean average. So that's why this temperature difference, as you can see here, which is the potential for heat transfer, the average value is taken as the log mean temperature difference, and it's not the arithmetic average that you have to take, right? So this is the definition of log mean temperature difference, which is used very commonly, not just in internal flow, but also in heat exchangers when you want to calculate, let's say, the heat transfer rate. And let's say you have found the value of H, you know area of the surface, but you have to get the log mean temperature difference between the two fluids to be able to find what would be the heat transfer rate. Okay, so this is about the log mean temperature difference. So this Q can be written as HA delta HAS delta T log mean. Okay. This is when you have multiple resistances. So we are going to take up one example on this later on. Now we are interested to find the Nusselt number for the internal flow, starting with the fully developed laminar flow. And again, in that there are two types of boundary condition: the constant heat flux boundary condition and constant surface temperature boundary condition. Now, if you do the analysis with the required simplifying assumptions, one is able to show that we already know that it has to be a constant, right? H has to be constant because it becomes constant when the flow becomes thermally fully developed, right? So with simplifying assumptions, and for the condition Qs double prime is constant, that is constant heat flux, okay, you are able to show that the value of Nusselt number is equal to 4.36, right? That derivation has been done here with required simplifying assumptions, right? You can take that as an assignment. So this Nusselt number is 4.36 for constant heat flux boundary condition. For constant heat flux boundary condition in case of fully developed laminar flow. Okay. So when you solve such examples, your job in a way becomes very easy, and Nusselt number is just a constant. You don't have to use any correlation for that, right? It is just a constant number. Okay. Now, the case of constant surface temperature is a bit complicated. The analysis is not as simple, but even in that case, it's a constant, and it can be shown that the Nusselt number is 3.66. 3.66 when the surface temperature is constant. Okay. So this is for the laminar flow. Now what about the turbulent flow? In case of turbulent flow, of course, it's very difficult to do the analysis, or like here it at least for the constant heat flux boundary condition with the required simplifying assumptions, you could find the constant, you could find the correlation for Nusselt number, or the number, the constant number for the Nusselt number, and as well as the constant surface temperature boundary condition. But in case of turbulent flow, you have to depend upon the empirical correlations, right? We are not going to go into the analysis of the entry length, right? But we directly jump to the correlations, convection correlations for turbulent flow in circular tube. So one of the very popular correlation is by Dittus-Boelter. So it's Dittus-Boelter correlation or equation, and it is expressed as NUD is equal to 0.023, Reynolds number is to 4 by 5, Prandtl number is to N. Now, what is this N? N is 0.4 for heating and 0.3 for cooling. It means that if the fluid is being heated, then you would use N equal to 0.4, right? It means that if the surface temperature is higher than the fluid temperature, then fluid is being heated, so N would be taken as 0.4. And when the surface temperature is less than the fluid temperature, that is fluid is being cooled, so in that case this would be taken as 0.3. So this Dittus-Boelter correlation is a very popular correlation for internal flow. Now mind well, this is for turbulent flow. What does it mean? What is the criteria for this? You can use it for Prandtl number. The range is very wide, 0.6 to 160. Reynolds number, it should be greater than 10,000, right? So it's completely turbulent above this value of Reynolds number. You can use it for somewhat lower value of Reynolds number also, but the equation becomes less accurate. Mind well, this correlation never give you the value that you get would not be the perfect value, right? You are always accepting that there is some plus or minus in that, right? And that can be somewhere around, let's say, plus or minus 10%. Okay, in different cases it is different, but that is what is expected. So when you get a number, it doesn't mean that it has to be perfectly that much heat transfer. You will get that much heat transfer coefficient for the given condition. And then there are other correlations also. So one is by Cedar and Tate. And then whenever you have this kind of expression, this is for the properties at the surface. When you write μs, you find the dynamic viscosity at what temperature? At the surface temperature, and not at the or the fluid temperature or mean fluid temperature. Okay, or yeah. And then another one is by Nilinsky, and that is, for that you have to first get F, right, which you can get with the Petukov correlation, and then you can get the Nusselt number, and this is applicable for somewhat higher Prandtl numbers also, right? So when you are using oils with very high Prandtl numbers, you might go for this correlation. But if your Prandtl number is up to 160, then you can still go for the Dittus-Boelter correlation. So these are the correlations for turbulent flow. So now I think we are equipped with the required correlations and the Nusselt number formula. So we can take up example. So I am taking an example here. Now a similar example has been solved for two different fluids, one for water and another for thermic fluid. So thermic fluids are basically their oils, right? And you are going to use the properties of engine oil, and you can use them because they don't boil at 100 degrees Celsius. So for high temperature applications, they may be used because they would not start boiling. Of course, if you can handle boiling, you might still go for water, or if you are ready to pressurize the circuit and build the required piping for that, you can go for pressurized water, and it may still not boil. Uh, but one choice is there, that you use oil in place of water. If your temperatures are, let's say you're operating near ambient conditions, and your temperatures are higher than 100 degrees Celsius, you don't want to handle boiling. So in that case, you may, because when boiling is involved, the volume changes drastically, and the velocities will increase accordingly, or you have to increase the size of the piping, etc. So finally, you have to decide whether you want to go for all liquid, or you want to go for two phase, and design your system accordingly. So in one case, I have done it for pressurized water. In another case, it is for the oil. So I'm not discussing here the case of water, that will be given as an assignment, but the diagram that I am showing here is going to remain same. But I'm talking about the thermic fluid. So what is the case being discussed here? What we are discussing is, you like the other things given here are of less important. In a way, what you are saying is that um, you are heating up the water, and then that water is used to run a you can produce steam from that, and you may run a turbine with the help of that, and generate electrical power. But the other things are of less interest to us. Our interest is mainly in this receiver tube. A parabolic trough type of collector is shown. I hope you know something about this, or you can recall the things that you learned in alternative energy sources. So parabolic trough type of collector is shown, and the sun is shown. So radiation falls on this, and it focuses it on this tube, the receiver tube, through which you are going to pump the fluid. Okay, this fluid can be water, or this fluid can be oil. So you are pumping that fluid, so it's getting heated, and we are going to assume that the heat flux is constant, right? So the same, like equal area of the parabolic trough is going to provide equal amount of heat onto the surface of the tube here. So we are going to assume that the heat flux is constant throughout the length of the tube, and you can have multiple troughs in parallel as they are shown here, or you may put them in series. I think in the example I have taken them in series because the contribution from a single parabolic trough may not be very high. It may not give you very high temperature rise. The reason is that solar energy is a diffuse source of energy. It doesn't give you very high intensity. So you need a very large area. Now, if we you cannot make a parabolic trough of, let's say, 100-meter length at a stretch, right? Continuous one. So you have to break it into pieces. So though I think they are shown in parallel here, we are going to take them in series. Okay, and so the temperature rise through each parabolic trough. We are not going to talk about the parts of that. We may assume that it's continuous, but in practice you can think that it is not going to be manufactured as a single piece because of different difficulties, right? So I'm talking about this example. You can write down this example: the length and width of a parabolic trough type of collector. So width and length actually. So it is 100-meter is the length of the parabolic trough, and 4 meters is the width of the parabolic trough, and the diameter of the absorber tube, right, the receiver tube through which you are going to pump the liquid. So that's at the focal line of the trough, and there the radiation is focused. So the fluid gets heated as it passes through that tube. So that diameter is 25 mm. And the thermic fluid, so an oil, it enters at 134 degrees Celsius and exits at 160 degree Celsius temperature. And these type of solar collectors can use only the beam radiation, the normal beam radiation. The beam radiation is 800 watt per meter square, and the efficiency of the collector is given to you. You may take it 55%. So you have to find what is the flow rate of the thermic fluid. You have to hit it from 134 to 160. So it's a closed circuit. So you are not heating the fresh oil every time, right? It goes to the, let's say, the heat exchanger, where it gives heat to, let's say, water, and let's say it boils water there, and temperature reduces from 160 to 134 in the heat exchanger. It comes back to the parabolic trough, where its temperature is again increased from 134 to 160 degree Celsius. Okay, and that is done with the help of the solar energy available on the surface of these a series of parabolic troughs. So here single length is mentioned, but in actual it may be broken down into multiple parts. Okay, so you have to find the flow rate of the thermic fluid. So this part is actually very simple. It's just energy balance. That is how much energy is available, and you want to produce this much delta T. So how much will be the mass flow rate or volume flow rate? That is what you can calculate. The second part actually involves the knowledge of heat transfer. What will be the surface temperature of absorber tube at inlet and outlet? Right. So your fluid will enter at 134 and come out at 160, but it is flowing inside a tube. Again, we are going to assume that it's a thin tube, and the outer and inner surface temperature of the tube is not much different, but it is certainly different from this 134 and 160. And what is the reason? The reason is that there is a finite heat transfer coefficient which is related with the internal flow. So the fluid temperature will not be equal to the surface temperature, right? Fluid temperature would not be equal to the surface temperature. The surface temperature has to be higher than the fluid temperature, because heat transfer is occurring from surface to the fluid. I hope you can understand that, right? So you are finally giving heat to the fluid which is flowing in the tube, right? So the outer surface temperature, or rather the surface temperature of the tube here, has to be higher. How come is it higher? Because it is receiving the solar radiation continuously and converting it into heat. Now, how much will it be higher? Actually depends upon the internal heat transfer coefficient. Okay. Ideally, if the heat transfer coefficient is infinite, then the surface temperature also would be 134 and 160, but that can never be the case. If your H value is high, then the difference will be smaller. The tube will not get heated too much, but if your heat transfer coefficient is low, accordingly the tube surface temperature is going to be higher, right? And if the flow is fully developed throughout the length of the tube, right? If it is turbulent flow, you don't need to worry about the this entry length much, right? It is just 10 times the diameter. So 10 times the diameter here will be just 250 millimeters, 25 centimeters, and the total length is 100 meters. So that 250 like mm or 25 centimeter is nothing as compared to 100 meters. So if it is turbulent flow, you don't need to worry much about the entry length. So assume that throughout the length of the tube, the flow is thermally fully developed, and the difference between the surface temperature and the fluid temperature remains the constant heat flux boundary condition which we just discussed, right? So in this case, we are interested in the surface temperature. Actually, the losses from a solar collector depends upon the surface temperature of the absorber surface, right? So that's why this number or calculation may be important. So the we are going to use either, if it is coming out to be laminar flow, then constant heat flux boundary condition, and you can use Nusselt number is equal to 4.36. But if it is the turbulent flow, your Nusselt number, sorry, your Reynolds number, if it is coming out to be greater than 10,000, then you can safely use Dittes-Boelter correlation, provided that your Prandtl number is not greater than 160. Okay, so we can do that exercise. We may not be able to perhaps finish that in this lecture, but the initial part you can see just the information given has been listed down here. So the width of the trough is 4 meter, the length of the trough is 100 meters, diameter is 25 mm, right? I've written it as 1 inch, so 25.4 mm. So a small difference. You may write 25.4 here, right? So inlet temperature is 134 and outlet temperature of the fluid. So here we are using thermic fluid, and the properties for the same has been given to you. So it's engine oil properties, fresh engine oil properties that you might use here, which is again temperature dependent. So you have to first find which is the temperature that you are talking about. Okay, so average temperature of the thermic fluid is you can take average of this 134 and 160, and that can be used to get the property of the thermic fluid. But what I have done is I have added 10 degrees Celsius or 10 Kelvin in that. This is because I know that the surface temperature is going to be a bit higher than the fluid temperature, right? So I have taken some additional temperature, and but this is not must. You may just take the average of 134 and 160, right? Now your IB is 800 watt per meter square, right? The beam radiation intensity, and efficiency is 55%. What is the area of the total area of the parabolic trough collector? It is length into width, right? So width is actually you are going to consider a rectangular plane. Okay, you are going to consider a rectangular plane. Though the parabola is curved, okay, you are going to consider a rectangular plane. Why? Because that's the aperture area, right? That's the aperture area. So the aperture area is length into width, that is coming out to be 400 meters square. So how much is the energy input into the collector? It is area into IB. So 320 kilowatt is the total input. This is input, right? What is falling on all the troughs. But then what is falling, it is reflected and it is coming on the surface of the absorber tube. This reflection is not 100%. Absorption is also not 100%. Absorption increases the temperature of the absorber surface. So there are different types of heat losses occurring. So finally, what goes into the thermic fluid is not equal to the heat that is supplied, right? The heat that is striking the collector. So the efficiency is given 55%. So 55% of this 320 kilowatt is what is actually going into the thermic fluid. So this Q, what is going into the thermic fluid, is efficiency into the input energy. So what is going into this is 176 kilowatt into the thermic fluid is 176 kilowatt. And then, so how much is the mass flow rate? You can get the mass flow rate with this equation. So Q upon Cp of the thermic fluid upon the temperature difference is given. So mass flow rate is 2.739 kg per second, right? So you can try this part and check whether whatever number I have told you are correct or not, right? And the later part of the example will be done in the next class.